introductions is to tell you about the forthcoming lectures before doing introductions of tonight. So I wanted to remind you that there's, in fact, a lecture here next Friday in this room by Karen Fairbanks, and then the following Wednesday, the 23rd, in the same room by Antonio Latini. Tonight's lecture is, it's my pleasure actually to say that it's a joint lecture between the Department of Architecture and the Baker Lab. And the Baker Lab is sponsored by an endowment that we received from the family of Frederick Charles Baker, who is a luminaire designer in Portland and worked with many, many architects and other designers in Portland in developing a series of luminaires. And he left our school an endowment to help interiors students and architecture students study light and lighting in buildings. And we often like to spread that out in terms of thinking about what light and lighting is, to be as broad in our understanding of that as possible. And I think tonight's speaker will help you to see the broad possibilities of light. But I'd like first to have Erin Moore tell you a little bit more about tonight's speaker.
Thank you, Ginger. So when I think about trying to sum up Claudia's life and work, I think I have to almost get a map out to sort things out, knowing that it starts in Austria, and then London for architecture school, and Sweden for lighting school, and Sweden, I hope I'm getting it right because it's a complicated map, and then to a prestigious lighting firm in Sweden, and then a courageous leap to Tucson, where I was incredibly lucky to come to know her and to be influenced by her insights into lighting. And since then, she's done installation work in Kyoto, in Anchorage, in Scottsdale, and is consulting on lighting for residences in Arizona, California, Tennessee, and I understand New York City at the moment. So I'm very happy to be able to welcome Claudia to the University of Oregon today.
Well, thanks for the introduction. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Aaron, to initiate this idea of coming here and also seeing your work today with the luminaire design. And thanks, Allison, to keep all the contact all along and make this happen. I, for a while, was thinking about what I would be talking to you about, because there's so many aspects I am fascinated with regarding lighting. And so I decided to actually talk a little about my personal path and give you a bit of an idea of my fascination, what inspired me, or still does inspire me, what baffles me, and perhaps give you a bit of an how would you say, like give you a bit of an introduction to my way of seeing light and having learned to see light. It actually started for me when I was graduating from architecture school in Graz in Austria, when I was very intrigued by the topic of whiteness, and this brought me to Sweden, where I had the opportunity to go there through a scholarship and finish my final thesis project. And it made me aware that I wasn't knowing enough about architectural lighting or lighting in order to be able to generate the space I'm interested in. And the space I'm interested in terms of architectural space is atmospheric space, which means it's a combination of all aspects. And lighting seems a very crucial part of this. So this is showing, it's basically a fall day in Stockholm, right in the center at Slussen, and it gives you an impression of the urban atmospheric quality that you might perceive from day-to-day basis. And it also shows that it's always part of the way, or the beholder and the beholder's interpretation of how you live with it and work with it, or how you appreciate it. And I had, in order to learn about lighting, the first step was an education at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, which is a master class. And my observations over a year of study there and living the absence and presence of light was resulting in a thesis on clouds and cloudiness. And this is just, it's one of the images giving an impression of how light renders with density and atmosphere, like the cloud. It also made me aware, after graduating from the Royal Institute of Technology, that I needed to really work in the practical field, because just a study and an analytical understanding of it wasn't really making me much more aware of it. I just really needed to get some practical experience. And I had the opportunity to start working for the renowned Swedish firm Ljus Arkitektur. And the first project I was put on was a very large villa of 9 court in Dubai, which unfortunately until today hasn't really started construction, because it turned out to be too complicated to construct, or too sophisticated to construct in a building environment where a lot of construction is very fast and very rigid or very raw. And so the sophistication of the house wasn't allowing them to find a contractor building it until today. One of the other projects I've been working with is the lobby of the Nordic Light Hotel, that had gotten an upgrade from the previous electrical lighting to a more up-to-date changeable lighting system. And we also had been doing urban lighting or exterior lighting with facade lighting on an industrial facade. And I wanted to tell you about this project because it's very interesting that in Sweden you have to go through many political moves if you intend to do something that's very visible. So this facade lighting went through a process of several months to be approved by the city, because once you approve an application like this facade lighting, it can be applied in any other building in a similar application, even in another city. So it's very crucial that they take a long process to approve a lighting if it hasn't been applied before, because it means that eventually every industrial facade of a similar type could have lighting application, and you don't necessarily want to have that happen. This is just showing how it actually had been achieved through an LED system, which is showing different parts here. What's also interesting about this project is it had been implemented 6 years ago, and about 2 years after the opening, 2 of these items broke, and the technology nowadays is changing very, very fast. So it was very difficult to actually get a resemblance. And if you start working in the practical field, you have to be very aware of the market and its changes, because it can happen that your application will not, or the provider will not be able to provide you with with restocked exchangeable items. So you need to be very careful of thinking ahead of time. Another project I had the opportunity working with during my time in Sweden and as a project manager was a project in the desert in Scottsdale, Arizona, with Wendell Burnett architect, who had been designing this villa. And it's characteristic through its aspect that it kind of grows out of the ground and encloses an internal courtyard that at nighttime, or an internal courtyard that is surrounded by glass walls, and at nighttime basically the exterior shell becomes the limit of the house, whereas at daytime the courtyard is very protected and a really nice shadowed area to hang out. And this is just one image from the project that after 6 years still is not finished construction, but it's soon to be. So it's a very sophisticated building. It's out of rammed earth that's very smooth with a lot of steel, like raw steel, basically building the skin. And this is the entry situation where the design had been an origami ceiling that will be lit through the slits or the small gaps. Another project I had the opportunity to work with was a hotel for the Amman Resorts group in south of Utah, and it's actually a hotel concept that comes out of Asia, and the concept is more to make you feel at home. The architectural consideration was to keep the landscape that's very remote. It's about an hour from an hour drive from the border, because you need to drive 20 minutes around the mountain range to reach the hotel. And the hotel is pushed towards a rock formation that ends in the heart of the hotel with a kind of dragon tail that ends right in the center and is surrounded by a pool. And here you see an image of the cross-section of the standard room, which also has beautiful views towards the mountain ranges and the setting sun on one side, and has screens towards the passageways. And this is an actual image of the room installed, with the lighting concept having been to keep light close to human in the rooms and more intimate areas, and to also kind of work with the very sandy colorations and soft colorations of the surrounding. This is the entry that has fabric canopies, and to the right you would find the lobby. This is showing the staircase of the spa building, and this is the same situation at night. This is the entry to another section of the spa, which is actually showing, it's a long passageway, and behind you would be a large door that would just close, and your shadow would be projected onto this silver leaf surface. And then once you approached this feature, you would turn right and you would enter the spa. So it's a lot of sequences of moments that are put into scene. The next project on the use architecture was a collaboration for Rick Joy Architects in trying to find divine light for a chapel for the private university in Austin, Texas. And we did many studies on achieving the different qualities of daylight and how these kind of render on the surfaces and eventually allow you to receive communion in this divine light. The electrical lighting for the general congregation room was considered to be also a daylighting concept with a system called parans that allows you, that considered to have one point of light shared by two people. And so the whole congregation area of 120 seats would have had these small points of light that kind of make you have this very intimate experience and reflections. This is giving an idea of the entry hallway of a large hacienda in New Mexico, Taos, that is built entirely out of rammed earth, with rammed earth paravaults. And for this, we had a lot of consideration of using plug-in lamps and trying to stay away from the mass of the building or the constructed wall, and use the ambiances to give light to the space. This is another concept for the dining room, which, in order to not touch the rammed earth walls, and the room otherwise had no opening except the door towards the room and a fireplace giving light, because the client was wanting to have a dining like Babbitt's Feast. We came up with an idea of using mirror discs that would throw light back onto the area where you actually would want to see what you eat, like seafood, but otherwise don't have any visible light source in the space. And so this was basically the first sketch. The lights here shown to both sides were eventually removed because the ledges were not built, so we didn't have it. And in the end, we have a concept of having the table embodying the source of light that kind of gives up light towards directional discs. And this is showing the building, how it sits right on the edge of a mesa and with beautiful views towards the mountains. And this is also one of the constructions that's still waiting to be continued, because 2.5 years ago the client somehow had to put it on hold, and we still wait for it to be finalized. So a bit continuing with what Aaron had been starting to talk about, it's like my path and the way where I lived and had been educated had been very influential to me, and I want to give you a bit of an introduction to my background through also showing you how I'd been influenced by what I'd seen and experienced, and how you sometimes don't really know what impact you leave onto your surrounding. Like, this is an image from a visit in Mali, and it was very apparent how much you as a tourist, of a white tourist, leave an impact on anything you get in contact with, or anyone you get in contact with. This is showing the valley I grew up in. It's a small town in the southern region of Austria, very close to the Italian border. So we have a lot of mountains, lakes, a lot of grass and trees and seasons, which is like coming to Eugene today made me smile. It's like grass, it's green. This is the lake, and it just shows how the light conditions are very crisp. So we have different levels of humidity that make mountain ranges appear much closer to you or further away depending on the humidity levels in the air. Colors are very, very saturated, and the way the daylight appears is very different to what you would experience in Scandinavia, which you might see in a minute. This is just an image of the setting sun of the town I studied in. It's called Graz, and it's well known for its historic district of Baroque buildings. It had been cultural heritage in 2003, and this was the place I learned about architecture and architectural space. And this is an image of Stockholm again in winter, which gives a quite different impression. It can be very gray over several months of the year, and the light can be very dim generally because of the lack of intensity in winter. I mean, basically, daylight starts at 9 o'clock in winter, and it's dark after 3:30. So the actual daylight time is very reduced, and it has an effect on you not only in terms of how you live your life more independently on rhythms, but also psychologically. It has a strong effect on you in terms of, you might have heard seasonal disorder or other terms that categorize it, but you start creating an awareness of your daylight environment once you experience the lack of light or the too much light, which obviously happens in summertime. You have an overdose of light and everyone gets really hyper. You have lack of sleep. But if you have the opportunity to live the whole year, the body balances this out, and it has a huge impact on how you live life, how you culturally live it, and how you structure it. So it was, I would think, the biggest lesson I learned when studying lighting in Sweden was living the actual condition, the actual climatic and light condition. And this is, it's just an image of the white nights you have in summer. It's around June 21st, longest day. Basically, it never gets dark. So you have about 2 hours between 11 and 1 o'clock in the morning where you have a semi-darkness. But this photo was taken at 10 o'clock at night. So it gives a kind of idea of how it influences your daily pattern and how also the daylight kind of impacts you in every regard. This is showing my current home. It's Tucson, Arizona. And it gives an idea about the setting sun in summer. It's in the peak. It's about 40 degrees. Sunset's very different to Scandinavian sunset. Sunset in the desert is even dangerous because the sun sets and it's dark. It takes roughly 20 minutes and it's pitch black. In Scandinavia, you have a range of sometimes 2 hours. So it's a very gradual change, and so this is also interesting to consider. Another difference in the two, the Scandinavian environment and the desert environment is, in Scandinavia, you search for the sun. You constantly walk towards the light. In the desert, you constantly search for the shade. You always take the shaded path, the shaded house. You look for the darker areas. It's very lush, though. I mean, we have, some people say we don't have trees, but we also have trees with very fine filigree, so nature adjusts to the conditions in order to not lose too much humidity. And so every aspect of nature adjusts to the light condition that's extremely harsh and very brutal. It's very glary and overexposing. This is the courtyard condition of of the office where I work in, and it gives a bit of an idea of the light and shadow and the atmosphere that's that can be achieved, which to me is really the base of my interest and what I'm seeking when I do lighting design. And so it's always this atmospheric moment that's creating inhabitable space, or at least emotion or memory in motion, or maybe it's just causing emotion. It could be positive or negative, it could be confrontational or not, but at least it's causing emotion. It's not indifferent. Which I want to share a few images with you with that had been very intriguing to me. It's from Slot Canyon, or also known as Antelope Canyon in southern Utah, where your perception shifts. I mean, you walk into something that appears to you very dark, and you spend 1, 2, 3 minutes in this slot, and suddenly everything starts to be very light, and you have great view, or you start to see very well because your eyes adjust. So when thinking about lighting, to me it's not only thinking about the first impression, but also thinking about how it feels over a longer period of time, and how it feels entering from the one room or returning from the other, so that all the different view angles towards it. And how I tried to put this into projects is giving you a few ideas. This was the first project as an independent lighting designer here in the United States, which was a small house in Sedona, and it was just basically giving a few additions to creating space or thresholds, accentuate, and be a bit more scenographic, and not just let the space be very the same. This is a project in Tucson, which is a very prominent location. It's the 4th Avenue underpass, and the office I worked in at that time had gotten the commission which was a very complicated thing, to work with a project that had been developed over 12 years, and in the final 6 months, the city started to understand that the engineers actually wanted to build the engineers' drawings as it was shown, which always had been a kind of very raw shell, and the city started to engage Design Build Collaborative in order to give this bridge and underpass a bit more urban look. And so we were in the hard position to basically dress or decorate something that had been designed all along, which is an after effect, and which happens very often in lighting too, that you're introduced to a project at a very late stage, where you barely have the opportunity to have impact or to make an integral lighting concept. So if you were ever considering to work with lighting in the future, it would always be beneficial to be part of the project or the process very early in the beginning. And this is just basically giving an idea of the underpass and the 2 bridges that are pedestrian bridges, and that frame the main railway tracks that cross the city and divide the city into two areas. Another small project that came up was the MoCA, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Tucson, had the opportunity to change location and acquire the former building of the fire department. And so they gained a huge hall for the main exhibit area and 3 small galleries. And they approached me to come up with a lighting concept, but basically didn't have any funding or money to do it. And the concept had been to basically use what they have, but take their electrical wiring and make it so that you could use plug-in locations and have plug-in lamps that could be used for different locations or for different uses, different heights, for different displays or exhibitions. So it was a very bare concept, basically the minimal you could do at that point. But the other thought had been, knowing from the 4th Avenue underpass that they would also extend the renovation of the underpass along a block of downtown. They would also remodel the street lamps, and the concept had been to ask the city for all the old, still working metal halide street lamps and use just a fixture head in the museum, because metal halide is a very good quality of light for general lighting. And at first they were all up for it, but then eventually it also stopped on the implementation aspects of it. But that was the concept. And so in the end, I ended up helping them only for the gala opening with using the fluorescent light locations they had, just basically give them some blue films to make give a moonlight effect, and then contrast or balanced all that blue with some amber lamps that give some warmth. And it was a very successful gala. So they at that evening they gained a lot of money and now have a beautiful plaza in front of it. So that's another small commission that was not only lighting but also architecture remodel was to make a small studio gallery out of a double car garage. And the owner, who is a gallerist in town, is very opposed against track lighting. So we ended up having just monopoint in between each beam with a very good distance to the wall. So the monopoints would only be used for specific locations, and if he had a sculptural exhibit in the space, he would use 3 points next to each other pointing towards the piece in space. If he had an exhibit on paintings or photographs, it would be a very even light distribution towards the wall. And this is just one image of the finished space that gives an idea of the different qualities. A small project designed for Marfa, Texas, for a couple and their dog, where for Rick Joy Architects, where we had 2 levels. The lower level was mostly for art, a workshop, and a garage area, and the upper level was the private level. So the only architectural lighting or inbuilt lighting was in the living room area and kitchen, where you would have a kitchen counter, and everything else would be plug-in on the upper level. And this is just giving an idea about light distribution of daylight to understand how the light levels worked in that model. So we use the Dialux calculations to basically confirm our feeling, or sometimes we do obviously make design changes in order to change light levels. So when I was asked about the title to this lecture, it's like the question is not what you look at, but what you see. What I mean with that is it's really often also your background, your cultural background, and your personal way of looking at things, of how you're able to interpret what you see. And we just a minute ago were talking about this too. It's not always only your knowledge informing what you see, but it's sometimes through your knowledge that you actually are aware of something you look at, which means you start to see. So I had to go through an education in lighting and through working in the field to start seeing light, which hasn't been really, how do you say? Yeah, it only through that started to become apparent to me. And to me, it's a very interesting process of how perception works, and how you sometimes need to really stop for a moment and take the time to look at something twice, to see. And some things keep coming back to you. Some things momentarily don't have any impact, but they might come back, and something that might momentarily really fascinate you will be forgotten forever. So this is an artist in Austria, Esther Stocker, who really has a strong way of working with geometry and contrast. And she's making this first very two-dimensional, and in the meanwhile very three-dimensional installations that are sometimes fragments of space, which I think is very informative of how we look at space. This is a friend of mine, a very talented architect and artist, living and working in Seattle, and she's working a lot with contrast too, but it's about shadow and light, and it's about how light renders on these plaster pieces specifically, which has a beauty and a poetry to it. Or artists like Thomas Grönlund and Pietari Nisunen, like two Finnish artists who work a lot with sound and light. Or Robert Irwin. So when I keep talking about atmosphere, it's not just what light introduces to the space, or it's not just one aspect of space, it's the overall combination of all the aspects. So it's the objective architectural build, but it also is as much the subjective way it's lived with. So let's say, to give a good example, you can have all the parameters right for a wonderful restaurant. Everything's perfect in terms of architecture, all the materials work, and you have the wrong personnel serving you, your restaurant will fail. Because the people serving you give as much to the atmosphere as the built environment you intend to design. So I think it's crucial to create an understanding in both ways, and to also work with the end user, to work with the overall concept, to work with the maintenance and the program of a building, and not just the shell, which means working with lighting or designing a light fixture like we've seen this afternoon. It's also to think about how it might perform in the long run. And again, there are some artists that have been very inspiring to me, like Karen Sander, that just they change just one small aspect of the surface quality, and it starts engaging the user. So if you engage the user and create an awareness, you're already halfway where you want to be. Oh, this is another installation from Robert Irwin in London, where he had been using several fabrics hung in the same rhythm but with different imprints. And where you see the dark fabric, you also see how immediately light renders differently and saturation renders differently. So these are all aspects to consider in space, but also working with light. But this, it seems a very two-dimensional piece, but in fact it's just a natural stair that we found in Africa, in Mali, and the light basically makes you understand where to step on, because it's the brightest spot. So light and music had been often compared, because with music you talk about the absence of sound often making the poetry, and it's similar with light. So James Turrell, sure, an example everyone knows about, his sky spaces. This one is at Smoker in Scottsdale. Or Richard Serra's elliptical spaces that are so pure that you can really focus on how light renders on the material. And to me, it's revealing space because there's not much else you would focus on. So some people have claimed that artificial light could be seen as static, while daylight is constantly changing or is light of mood. I think nowadays you have to be fair enough to the new technology being able to allow for changing, but it's a very controlled way, and it does by far not introduce the same qualities daylight introduces. So this is showing the quite stunning ceiling construction at the British Museum in London. I don't know if any one of you had the opportunity seeing this space, but one of the aspects that's beautiful to me is what happens with the light and how this in itself translucent glass construction suddenly at sunset starts to shift, and the otherwise translucent construction suddenly turns to become solid because of the reflection of the light on the very light-colored sandstone. So at nighttime, suddenly you have this hovering canopy above you that nearly protects you. Or most likely, every one of you has heard about this installation from Olafur Eliasson, where he introduced a mirror upside down in the huge rotunda hall at Tate Modern in London. So he doubled the height of the space, which was very impressive in itself. But this whole series was called the Weather Project. And his initial idea had been he wanted to reintroduce the rain or the rainy climatic aspect of London to the turbine hall, but he wasn't allowed to do that because you have cast iron columns, and obviously the structure would have been harmed by trying such an installation. So he shifted and he introduced the sun. And the way he introduced the sun was through low-pressure sodium lamps that made the whole hole appear very yellow. So I don't know how familiar you are with what low-pressure sodium does, but one of the aspects this particular light does, which we know from traffic street lamps, It has a very specific light output, and it is causing in your eye to be perceiving mostly contrast but no color. So people were fascinated. They were just laying on the ground, and there was one of the most loved pieces at the Tate ever seen, because it changed their perception, and every person in space perceived themselves perceived differently through the light. And in addition to it, in order to power these low pressure sodium lamps, you have very large transformers. So the whole thing was buzzing. It's like and so talking about light and the effect it has, to me it's very important to consider the whole environment around it and the climatic condition around it. So talking about the Arizonan sun being really harsh and brutal is not only talking about its glare, but also feeling the heat on your skin from the 42 degrees outside, or like 120. So there's a combination of aspects that inform your understanding of light, or at least mine. And then there's the beauty of it, how it interacts with material and brings material to life. This is a dirt stair in Mali. Or this is a very, very dark mosque in Mali, where the light became visible through the dust particles in the air. And so when you want to claim that electrical light is static, to me, one of the aspects of the new light available on the market is that it lost its brilliance. I mean, even water that usually you would bring in an MR16 or an incandescent or halogen light source, water renders with brilliance and sparks. And it always is fascinating to see that, because it has life. Whereas the new technology flattens. It's much, yeah, it's flatter. But this image was taken from an exhibit. I had the opportunity to work with two friends of mine, Jay Atherton and Cy Keener, two very talented architects who work out of Phoenix, and who got the chance to do one of the architectural installations last summer at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Scottsdale. And the exhibit was called 90 Days Over 100 Degrees, which was basically asking the visitor to create an awareness of the climatic condition outdoors, and making them spend a few moments in this nearly ice cave-like installation that had ice on top that filtered the one daylight, skylight daylight that would enter. And so you had dramatic changes over the course of a day within this installation. I mean, at times it was very bright. At other times it was really dark and very subtle and pristine. So it was a very interesting installation that worked with time and aspects of duration of time and heat and cool and changing aggregates from ice to water, from water to ice. So this now is a contrary example of how to introduce brilliance to a building. It's the Untitled Chapel in Boston at the MIT, and it is a daylight opening in oculus above the altar, but the back piece has this small reflective gold-plated reflector discs that really create this engagement with, again, light, and most likely inspire you to feel enlightened, if you might say so. And now I want to move a little into a few other installations. This was an installation we did in Alingsås, where we were asked to create, or we had a workshop, and we had given this garden, and we created this miraculous garden for the girl of the house, Letizia. We called it Letizia's garden, and it was becoming her playground, in the sense that it had all kind of different glowing aspects, and it was a storytelling piece. It was really fun. I mean, everyone, at one time when we had the presentation, we got a very upset, or like we got a phone call, like really agitated, and it's like, yeah, the apples are missing. So someone had thought that the apples are really special and took the apples out of the yard. But what they didn't understand is that they only were the illuminated, how do you say? Well, the illumination came from a fiber optic system that illuminated the apples. So the apples weren't so special; they were just apples. And this was it's just another type of urban installation where you see how brilliance is introduced. This is in Graz at Christmas, where one of the first LED lighting systems was introduced in this manner, like chandeliers through upside down hanging Christmas trees, which is a strong tradition in Austria. I mean, not the upside down hanging, but the upstanding one. And then this is another installation, and I want to mention the previous and this project because of the way light gives character and gives identity. This was a concept of an artist in a small town close to my hometown, Gmünd. It has a few hundred people living there, and the artist had the idea to create a light calendar, and he talked to 24 inhabitants who would allow him to introduce red, or who would allow him to put on fire in their open fireplaces so that it would create smoke. And he would introduce red light on the chimney. And so over the period of the 24 days until Christmas, one more house in the town would have this red light, and eventually there would be 24 houses that would have this this chimney lit. And also there were this extended light kind of flowing ribbons, and people felt very engaged with it and are really enthusiastic about it because they got ownership. They felt part of that installation, and I think it's crucial to create this relationship if you want to achieve a successful concept. Which brings me to this small installation, which was an installation I did with my friend during my studies in Stockholm, where we had to do an outdoor installation in a small town south of Stockholm, which had a lot of immigrants, and so it had a lot of conflict, or potential for conflict and vandalism. So the municipality decided that after 10 o'clock at night, street lights and general lighting will be turned off. And the municipality decided to take away all urban furniture, so kids and teenagers couldn't linger around and have bad plans. So we came in, we said like, well, we have an idea, we combine both. We give them a bench and we give them some light. And we placed it at a very prominent location at it's basically a football field. It's a large field in front of a 60s social housing. And we placed it there, and went away, and then we walked back, and then there were these girls sitting there, and they were really telling us, like, what are you doing here? This is our space. Like, we don't want you to put this here. Take it away. And we said, it's yours. You can do with it whatever you want. You can ruin it. You can keep it. It's yours. Just if you like it and you protect it, you can have it for a long time. So they said, like, yeah, we'll ruin it. And then the next day, they actually were sitting on the bench when we came there, and they started to have ownership of it. And then after 1 month, when we took it to take it away again, because we had to dismantle this installation generally in the municipality, they were really sad that it was taken away from them. And again, it was this combination of giving them the stewardship to protect it or maintain it. If we would have just placed it there and we would have had the control to turn the light on and off, it probably would have been broken the next day. But because it was up to them how to use it and deal with it, I think it lasted. And so another place that has this character and gives identity is, to me, Santa Fe. I mean, you can discuss it. One might like it, one might not like it, but it creates a lot of character. It's something that's very individual, and it gives identity. So coming back to architecture, because we're here at the architectural school, and again, kind of combining these aspects of engaging the user, creating drama, telling a story, like giving space to inhabit, even if it's a public space like a gallery. You start seeing that people tend to go to the lit areas. People tend to settle where they feel comfortable. And I think just sometimes watching what your surrounding strives for is a very important observation to help you for your own design decisions. And these are just some images that might give impressions. So I don't know if I would 100% agree with Louis Kahn on that no space architecturally is space unless it has natural light. But I definitely would say that trying to simulate daylight or natural light with electric light is a hopeless idea and will eventually fail, because it's just very dynamic and it's constantly changing, which means it implies life. It implies a natural process. And I think that can, even if it's a programmed system, not be achieved with a system that constantly repeats itself. So these are images of the chapel, Liverance Chapel at Skogskyrkogård in the Woodland Cemetery in Stockholm, which is a beautiful place to look at daylighting or compose daylighting, how the building is oriented, how space, how distances or how proportions are set, how tiles are laid, how surface qualities occur, and how such a space where you mourn for a person or where you go through very strong emotions helps you to feel a bit more soothed, or like and so to my personal path of learning to see light my experiences in Sweden were hugely informative and important and inspiring, and especially my the opportunity to work or to make an installation on this topic of whiteness at the Ice Hotel was really helping me to understand it. I need to learn much more about it. And this is just showing the final result of this installation, which was basically a room out of snow, out of compacted snow, most homogeneous, with curved edges or rounded edges. So when people were entering the room, they were really they were confused because there was no horizon or there was no architectural clearly determined orientation point they could relate to. The only point they could relate to was the ground they stood on. But otherwise it was elusive to them if the wall started right here or 10 centimeters further back or like a meter or like, let's say, 3 feet further back. And so people would really become very timid. And just that aspect of making them wonder and making them aware of perceiving was a real reward for me. And it was perceived as a very Zen application. At the same time, because snow is a breathing material and it weathers, after a few months of use, the room, the perfect arch no longer is so perfect. It has already like crystallized, a crystallization on the inside, so it needs to be refinished. And the owners were telling me, like, we're not sure how long we can keep this until we put art into it because we don't know how long it might stay pristine enough. And in the end, I had been lucky because with the opening week, the Princess Victoria, the royal princess, she had been deciding for this room. So the room had this additional attribute of having had the future queen sleep in the room. So they kept it until the last moment when it really needed to get some additional upgrade, which was about 3 weeks before they closed the hotel. So what I mean to say with talking about the story is you might work on a project that means the world to you, and because it's a commission, you give it to the owner, and the owner actually has every right to do with it whatever they want. So they might sometimes decide against your preference, or it's just on the one hand learning to let go, and on the other hand understanding that in the real world you need to consider the life cycle. You need to consider how it holds up to perform over a given period of time without losing its quality. Or perhaps make that a feature, but then that's a different aspect. So again, without the user, all that there is material, no space, which brings me to this small installation in Anchorage, where I had been invited to participate in a group show with 12 other artists and architects, or groups of artists and architects. And the topic, or the main theme, was to work in the theme of Nordic culture and to give something to the city of Anchorage to overcome the very dark hours of or weeks of winter. And so my proposal had been to reintroduce the fun aspect of playing with snow and to give them light. And at first people were very hesitant to really engage with the piece because they thought it's art and you're not supposed to touch it. But the main idea was really that everyone would just grab a snowball or two, and eventually it would land in different areas of town or on different balconies and spread throughout Anchorage. And it was holding up a few days until the next big snowfall, and then it eventually was buried under a lot of snow. But yeah, that's another story. So once it started to melt, people went back and took these small LEDs because they really liked them. And I had a friend help me build them. Without her help, Tara Pata and her family, this wouldn't have been possible. And this is one of the projects we currently work on in the office. It's a ranch house in New Mexico. And in this project, I haven't only been doing lighting, but I've been doing also architecture. So it's a ranch house for a family that raises Wagyu beef. And the floor plan looks like this. So you have basically the west side is for kids and guests. The main section in the middle is an entry deck that continues through the main living room, dining, and kitchen area to the northern deck. And to the east, you have the master room with TV. And so, because it was a ranch house, the lighting had been very reduced and very modest, but we had the possibility to create some custom lampshades for the dining room, which is basically hammered brass, and the shape is specifically designed to allow the light to really come onto the table and stay in the area of the table specifically. But otherwise, one of the features regarding light would be the roof terrace that's spanning all across this deck area. And it's really the owner's most favorite space. He already responded a few days ago. They're moving in 3 weeks from now, but he responded a few days ago and he said, like, really, it's magnificent. He loves the stargazing, and in order to do that, in order to be able to see this phenomena like the aurora borealis or the stars in Arizona, or appreciating darkness when working with light is a big aspect of the whole exercise. So I want to I just want to make you aware that it's really sometimes good to stay away from using light and rather not light, but stay dark. And that's basically how I want to end my talk.
Process. So in the media of architecture, we draw and we make computer renderings and we make models. What do you do when you're designing light? How does that translate into something? What is the media of designing with light?
Well, in terms of daylight considerations, everything is 3D model, and really understanding a lot of studies of sighting and how is the orientation and how is the sun's path, and so the daylight understanding is everything is working with 3D and double check through that.
3D physical or 3D digital?
Both, but we start out generally designing with now with digital, and then once we came to a very good schematic design, we start really playing on a physical model. And but because we get faster and faster with digital, it's easier to adjust things sometimes for that. Then in terms of artificial lighting, it's very difficult to simulate anything on a 3D model. It's basically impossible because there are so many parameters of school light, you never can simulate them. Many parameters of surface qualities you never can simulate. And even fixtures that are in categories considered exactly the same type of fixture, when you actually have them next to each other, the light output and the quality of what the fixture gives you is worlds apart. So in terms of architectural lighting, and when it comes to specification, I have to have seen it before I specify it, or I have to order it as a sample, which often is helpful because then you discuss it with the client, they have something physical they can relate to, and then it's easier to discuss installation. But I also have to say that this is specific for residential projects and for the process we work with. It's possible to do it because it's perhaps a bit slower than the usual fast-track design. And if it was considered to work on big commercial buildings, you would need to really have a lab and kind of build one-to-one mock-ups and like that to ensure that your lighting solutions really work, because there's a lot of money in that. You want to avoid mistakes.
What are some of the problems that you encounter when you are brought into a project a little bit too late, when you're not involved in the design process? Like, what do you think that architects should think about?
Manifold.
Yeah,
I mean, it's very difficult because you end up becoming a decorator, and you have very little possibility to create an integral proposition that really works well with the building. The other aspect also is it's like in order to do it right, you have to be involved very early in the process, because anything that is built in the floor or in the wall goes up first, and that includes electrical wiring. And then you're the last person on the job because you're adjusting the final thing that goes in, and often in the architectural process, it's one of the things that's thought about very late. And the construction already had started, so you don't open up walls, or very rarely open up walls to reintroduce some wiring where it would be suitable. And so it's many causes that occur. But it's also very apparent, like if you have a good team where everyone works together and everyone's on the same page, you will get the best result. And if you have a team where miscommunication happens, even if all the specification had been right in the first place, if the installation is not done right, it's still not working. Or it still will be, there will be issues with it, and the owner will only deal with the issues he has. Not that it actually had been proposed and planned correctly. I mean, it has to be installed correctly, and you need to have the right people do it right. And often it unfortunately happens that people don't read installation instructions. It happens, for instance, you have a landscape lighting, and they're very specific. They're specific rated fixtures, so they can deal with the humidity or the wetness or dust, so they're specifically enclosed. And what electricians here in the US tend to do is, even though they see it's a very specific coupling, they just cut it off because they used wire nuts, and they just cut it off and jeopardize the whole fixture just to use the wire nuts, and the whole installation is eventually breaking down after a few years because that's probably how long it takes to the water, which is the source. And there's a lot of education going on hand in hand with the people on the job and then also the end user to make them aware of what they have, how to really use it to the full potential to get the best result. But that's not always, unfortunately, not always happening either. Cannot be the intentions.
Thank you, Claudia.